Welcome back. We're talking the state of media in South Africa, media freedom, freedom of expression, and we've just heard before the break that sometimes we get it wrong as the media, and that maybe we need to be managed somehow to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen. But we have the Press Council, where we find the Ombudsman, and Mr. Thloloe, if you're doing your job, we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
It's very interesting the way, the perspectives we take when we look at this problem. Fact, last year the Press Council received 461 complaints. Now, you might say 461 is much too many complaints. But I would again say, look at it against the background of the millions of words that journalists churn out daily, and you will realize that this is a drop in the ocean.
So does that mean we're doing well, or that people just can't be bothered to complain?
The issue for me is that if the public are aggrieved, they have access to our offices. They can phone us, they can send us emails, and say, I have a problem with this publication. Now, when we tackle that problem again, you look at what Lumko was saying here. He says there were so many apologies in a publication. And I believe that the fact that they're apologizing says they do care about what they do. If you look at it and say, so many apologies, therefore the media are not doing their work, that is a very flawed...
Shouldn't they be punished?
That, in fact, is the problem, that if you are looking at ways of punishing them, you are in fact trying to institute an additional court to the existing courts, where people will be sentenced for having made mistakes in their stories. People will be fined for having made mistakes, or people's licenses might be taken away. That, in fact, is a different institution from the type of ethical regulation that we participate in at the point.
All right, quick right of reply.
Yes, I think, Joe, the perspective you paint is clearly from a media perspective. We need to have a public interest perspective. The impact of those errors are huge. They compromise people's standing in society. An apology every day clearly suggests that there is no appreciation of the abuse of this power, because media is power. Don't make any mistake. Media is power. And that power, if it's abused, its impact is huge. So all what we're suggesting is an effective regulatory system that people have got confidence in it. The fact that you have 400 people complaining and a number of them who says, no, I'm not going to complain because they're not going to do anything anyway. But it tells the contrary, that clearly the behavior, the standards are being compromised. There's so much non-compliance with the press code. It's so much that you really ask yourself, do the journalists, or let's say subbies and editors, do they know the press code? Because to me, it just suggests they just don't know the press code.
Prof. Harber?
You know, my difficulty is that of all the issues we've enunciated about our media, the things we need to address, the odd thing about the push for the Media Appeals Tribunal is it doesn't address those issues. It's a diversion. We're here debating whether or not government should intervene more in newsrooms. I don't see how that's a solution to the systemic, structural issues that mean newsrooms are shrinking, journalists are under greater financial and political pressure. We need to think of ways of protecting the independent space, protecting people's space to report strongly and powerfully and critically. The Media Appeals Tribunal doesn't address the real issues of our media, and in fact it's a diversion from that.
So if we address the real issues, do the concerns that Mr. Mtide have fall away?
You know, newspapers are always going to make mistakes. And he's right that that has consequences. What's important is that you try and prevent mistakes, that you correct them as quickly as possible, so that a newspaper ran 2 corrections. It's a good thing. The New York Times, one of the great newspapers of the world, runs an average of 16 corrections a day. That's because they care about accuracy. So running corrections is a good sign. It's not a sign of weakness or anything else. You know, politicians make mistakes. We don't. We allow them to correct themselves.
Yeah.
I think what bothers me about this debate, and I listen to my colleagues, and also listen to the ruling party sometimes, is that there is a lot of defensiveness, and I think we're talking past each other in this whole thing about regulation. I mean, I was fortunately I was involved in those processes of the Press Freedom Commission and, you know, reforming or basically improving the Press Council and others. And in my experience, you find that there's a lot of defensiveness from the South African media, and I don't understand why in the era of technology, we're even scared of politicians who would look into the desirability of anything. I mean, I just think that the word tribunal is a bit unfortunate. But I think we have to all say that we think independent regulation would actually serve us better than regulation that is homegrown, for the simple reason that this is a contested country, and anything that doesn't, that basically looks like it is from within will not carry legitimacy, the necessary legitimacy that we need and that the media needs to carry. Now, it is important that, so if to me, I want a regulatory environment that gets us to a regulatory environment that gets us to a place where we can all have that regulation that have legitimacy across society. Currently, you've got a regulatory environment that has got legitimacy in some sections of society, but not universally, and that is a problem. And because this is a contested society, as I've said, and I think if we say, let's engage on this process, and let's actually be vigilant, like hawks, and watch as the politicians are deliberating. These days we know up to the minute what happens in Parliament. I mean, so what possibly can happen there that would be so bad that would lead to control of the media? I don't think even the ruling party is interested to get to a point where government regulates media or intervenes in newsrooms. But what bothers me is that when an editor becomes unethical, for instance, we haven't got a mechanism of addressing that currently. And there are those instances where editors do that, and journalists do that, and they become mischievous and stuff like that. For instance, let's say my brother does something out there, but they don't have a picture of my brother, and then they use my picture, you know, to say
Lumko's brother.
That's the thing, and you see, that practice is bad. It's not journalism; it's bad journalism, and we should. And editors who do that must have a consequence. I mean, you know, newspapers do that all the time, and you find that many editors are still in their jobs. Nothing has happened to that journalist. Nothing has happened to that editor. Nothing has happened to that publication. I think, I'm not saying that people must be fired at first go, but I think you need to go beyond just an apology. I think that's what the society is crying for. It's crying to say, the apology we hear, but let's go beyond.
All right. Mr. Thloloe, I know you want to say something, but I just want to get at some sounds from the floor, and you can incorporate your thoughts and your responses. If I could go to table number 3, Mzwanele Mani, we'll find you there. And I always ask you about Fugazenzele because you were there and setting it up. And we've got this issue about the voices representing the people. The president spoke and said that this publication touches 1 million people a month. So even if these journalists are getting it wrong, surely through the SABC, through publications like Bugazenzele, the other voices being heard, inverted commas. That's just an aside. Ask your question, comment, but also if you could address that.
Okay. Yeah, let's start by saying, I think from where I sit, I support fully the Media Appeals Tribunal. I think, why is it that media is afraid of this? What have they got to hide? And I think the challenge with the current system as well is that we've got Joe there, who is part of the system actually. So he's very numb to these issues. So this is the problem. And then we've got the professor also on the other side who has taught these journalists to behave the way they do. So this is a very conflicted situation. But the question I have is that why is it that media in this country has not understood that South Africa is a developmental state? And therefore there are a lot of news that about developmental issues. Basically it's not even news, it's rather information. And yet we have a media in this country that is looking for something that which they deem newsworthy, and for some reason the fact that government has spent billions of rands building houses, for them that's not news, and therefore they don't report, and therefore the only time they report is when something wrong has happened. Why do we have this kind of punitive journalism? To your question, to your answer, I think government is a very cooperative government. Is trying to say there's space for media to report. This is why they do press briefings, but media is not even doing that. If you go to the website of government, you see the tonnage of information that is in there, but media just looks at it and looks the other way. It's sort of playing its role as a conveyor of information. So indeed, I think it's a fair criticism to say media in this country is censoring government.
Okay, all right, so the three of you are going to respond to that. And I'll start with you, Mr. Thloloe.
I just wanted to respond to Mze's comment about the independence of the press council as it exists now. I'd like to point out to him that the head of the appeals panel in the press council is the retired former president of Gauteng, Judge Bernard Mwepe.
I know.
Yes.
The head of the press council itself is a former judge, the former judge president of KwaZulu-Natal, Judge Levinson. Now, you can't get more independent than that.
Okay.
And you can't accuse them of being part of the industry.
Okay.
So that the argument that we are not independent is false by the wayside.
Okay.
Now,
No.
what we should be looking at is the fact that we have courts that deal with issues about defamation, etc., etc. People still have the chance to go to the courts and say, so-and-so has defamed me, I've lost so much, I need to be compensated for that. Our system is an internal system that says, journalists, here is a code by which you should practice.
And if they don't do that, what then?
If they don't do that, as I say, the only thing that publications have is their credibility. The more they apologize, the fewer readers they get. People lose faith in them.
Yeah, but the apologies on page 4, page 5, and the original stories on the front page.
Again, that's a myth that's been circulating.
Okay.
If you look at all the sanctions we have imposed since 2007, you will realize that the sanction matches the offense.
Okay. Prof, it's your view?
You know, I said earlier that the Media Appeals Tribunal is a diversion from the real issues.
Okay.
There are real and substantial things the ANC and the government can do to help improve our journalism. Number one, I would say, fix the SABC. The SABC should be setting the highest standards for journalism so that others would have to follow them. So what I'm saying is that there's really useful, positive ways in which issues in our media, and there are issues in our media, can be addressed. The Media Appeals Tribunal is addressing the concern of politicians that they're getting too much criticism, that they're not saying what government wants, the wrong issues.
So what should the SABC be doing?
It should be producing the highest level of independent journalism.
And we're not doing that
and
now.
Carrying the national conversation. They are not doing it adequately. They are not setting the bar high enough.
Okay, all right. Yes, and then Karima, you'll be next.
No, I hear Brother Joe saying that the current mechanism is independent. I mean, it is not true, actually. It's not. Because once you have people that are players, then you are no longer talking about independence, because it's 50-50 currently. You know, the judge chairs it, but it's 50 media, 50 public. You know, if you look at people that sit on the other side representing public, you know, you don't find people that actually represent other sections of society. For instance, there are no unionists there. There are no people from the community sector there. There are no people who are activists generally. You know, it's more middle class type people, and there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens in these situations, where you find that there is a small group of people that wants to shackle our media because of the particular view that, you know, maybe we are under pressure, we are under threat, that we will be muzzled somehow. And I don't think that any government can actually, even if this government tries, it will not be able to succeed to actually muzzle the media, because we actually now, the media now is much more powerful than it has ever been in history, because there is social media, so other components of media have been added. That will make it very difficult for any government to regulate us.
Okay.
But anyway, let me just also, I forgot one thing to say. The Press Freedom Commission, which we actually commissioned as the media, said there should be more representation from the public on the Press Council than we actually didn't follow that recommendation. They also said on the appeals panel, there should be no media people. But they are there now. So I'm saying, it looks like we're saying that we are afraid of something, you know. I think the best way to protect your legacy and the best way to deal with, to end legitimacy, actually, is leave it unprotected. You know, nobody's going to take it, because if you keep on saying that, well, we want to remain in control, but we want to be independent and stuff like that, it is not going to work.
Karima, you've been accused of not reporting everything, and as a chief content officer, is that true?
I think the media generally in South Africa, like I said, deny often that its choice of news stories, what it considers to be news, who it quotes. Let's take today, for example. Today the finance minister gives us an indication of what kind of budget we're going to have next year. If you look almost across all media platforms today, you'll have mainstream economists talking about the state of the economy, whether the monies have been allocated correctly. You'll very rarely find economists that have different views, alternative views about how to spend money, about whether education should actually be free and that the budget should reflect that, over, let's for example say, spending on buying nuclear power. You're not going to have those kinds of analysts on the television shows today. So there is definitely a way in which the narratives in South Africa are captured, particularly in mainstream publications, print publications. But that is changing, and there's a whole range of things that can be done. Certainly at independent media, for whom I can speak, I can't speak for others. The push there is to challenge the dominant narrative, not just about the government, but about society, about the globe, about our continent. And I think the ANC can actually do more. Mr. Mtide himself sat on the MDDA. The budget of the MDDA got tinier and tinier and tinier. That is a contributing factor to the closing down of space and of voices. We need more voices in society. We mustn't think that our readers are foolish and stupid. People don't come at our news without their own world experience. They will judge for themselves whether the news is an adequate and accurate reflection of their lives. So I think there are a couple of things that we can do to ensure that more voices are heard. We can increase the funding to the MDDA. We can increase funding to vernacular language newspapers. We can invest more in training of journalists. There's a whole range of things that we can do. The other thing that I also think we need to accept is that we have a perfect court system that is there to augment what we already have in terms of the Press Council. It's not as if people have no recourse at all. So this idea that the Media Tribunal is going to be this kind of one catch for everything is slightly misleading, because I think what we need to look at is the range of mechanisms that are actually there. The other thing that I'd also just perhaps like to challenge the proponents of the tribunal on is, what are the punishments that they're seeking? And because there's some really outrageous ones that are being floating around, that people must be licensed, that their ability to do their jobs must be looked at, fines. Other countries, you can go to jail. So it's not as if the discussion around punitive measures happens in a vacuum. I would have thought that if we want to ensure media freedom and greater accountability, we'll err on the side of democracy rather than punitive action.
All right. Let me go back to the floor. And I know you've got things to say. And if you could comment as the questions come through, you can just add. And also, I'm going to ask my panelists to shrink their answers a little bit. Think in terms of Twitter. 140 characters for your answers. Donald Dipoko, table number 4.
Good morning. I want to agree on one point with Mzi. There are no Chinese walls in between editorial and ownership. And what we are skirting around is the fact that there is a massive commercial interest in the kind of news stories that are being told. Now, I actually wanted to ask Professor Harber this question. It's been bothering me. I have a sense that whenever government communications practitioners have a particular perspective or they want to approach content in a particular way, the pushback that we get from the media is that government is using advertising to try and influence the editorial. Now, I have practiced before in the commercial space, and I believe I've got a fairly good understanding of how the commercial imperative works. And I want to know what specific media freedom it is that government is infringing on by deciding which audiences to target in their communications, which communication platforms to use, because there is something that often comes up, and we are being pilloried for, I think, exercising a right which every other organization has in the country. Thanks.
Prof, and then we'll get to you.
I'm a bit bewildered by the question, because I don't know of a criticism that says government shouldn't advertise or use the media in whatever way it is appropriate. Of course, the government has a right to advertise. It has an obligation to communicate, and advertising is part of that. I think there is a concern that there has been a threat to use advertising to favor the government's friends and to disfavor its critics. And to me, that's illegal and unconstitutional. The government has to spend its advertising money fairly. It's public money. So that is my caution. But as to whether or not the government shouldn't advertise, there's no threat to press freedom in the government advertising per se.
Okay.
Maybe let me start from that one. I'm not sure of where what Prof is saying comes from. I think if you, and I invite in particular academics and the media to read the ANC resolutions. The resolution suggests that we should use advertising to promote media diversity. It doesn't suggest to promote only those who favor us, but it's to promote media diversity. Let's diversify this media landscape. As Karima is saying, we need more voices. And that is what we need to be able to consciously do, and that is not illegal. But I want also to invite, in particular academics, professors, to read the resolution. The NC is not saying the Media Appeals Tribunal, which, by the way, it says, let us discuss a possibility of establishing a system that will serve the public interest, including thereof the desirability of a media appeals tribunal. It never says it's an answer to everything. It says, let's discuss. What unfortunately our media has done, which we last had this before 1994 where you suppress information. But it is our media post-1994 that suppresses information. It actually does not reflect what the resolution is saying. You go further. That resolution speaks to a whole lot of other interventions. Fix the SABC. Yes, read the resolution. It says, let's fix the SABC. Strengthen MDDA. Yes, the resolution says so. Let's strengthen the MDDA. It talks to skills development. It talks to probing the possible anti-competitive behavior that resides in the market structure in the media. You have Caxton School of Journalism or Caxton Professor. There is a diversity challenges that are there in our media, in the market structure. You have the mainstream that is predominating the industry across the value chain, from publishing, printing, advertising, research, circulation. You have an audit of Bureau of Circulation that is established by the mainstream media, whose decision makers are predominantly from the mainstream media, who sets the rules of who becomes the new entrant. So the barriers to entry are entrenched, established in the structures of the market structure. So there is a whole lot of interventions that we're saying, let there be done. Why do we have a problem when we're saying, fix also the print media? Because print media has got power. In our case in South Africa, you even have the biggest newsroom, which is SABC. But you find them in their diary rooms, having all set of newspapers, deriving the agenda from those newspapers, and then following up those stories. So let's have diverse media so that we're able to then set an agenda from a diverse perspective. But lastly, I think, again, in particular, as the media and professors, let us disabuse ourselves of suggesting when people are discussing, when our society is discussing principles, you say it's because politicians are aggrieved. I'm sorry, if you go through the Press Freedom Commission report and see who made submissions to that commission, it was not just politicians. If you go to the South African Human Rights Commission report that probed the media, who made submissions? It was not just politicians. If you go to the TRC, who made submissions? So let us focus on the principle and not speak to some so-called aggrieved politicians.
I'm going to have to take a quick break.
But just lastly, no part of that resolution suggests government should control regulation. So again, let's disabuse ourselves of that notion.
I'm going to take a quick break, and I'm just wondering, we're sitting here, and maybe this conversation is actually nice and academic. And the question that's going to come up after the break talks about social media. And I've got a feeling, honestly, that the stuff that's trending is not even in our newspapers. And so we might have this intellectual debate about what we can't do, what we can do. And the reality is that people are tweeting whatever they want to tweet, and they're going to get on with it, and they're completely uncontrolled. So we'll explore that after this break. And Rejo is going to pose that question to the panel. Stay with us.